They didn't come to the funeral. Not a single flower, not a text, not even a question about how Jared was holding up. But when word spread that Peter Shaw, Jared's late husband, had left behind $1 million for their dog, the family that once erased them both came knocking. And they weren't knocking to grieve. They came to claim. Just days earlier, Jared had buried the love of his life, the man who once taught him how to laugh through panic attacks, who held his hand at every failed adoption meeting, who left sticky notes on the fridge reading, "If I die before you, remember to feed Scout first." And now the house was quiet, too quiet. Scout, the husky they rescued from a landfill in winter, sat by the window for hours, tail still, head bowed, as if waiting for footsteps that would never come. Peter had been diagnosed with cancer last spring. From that day on, he recorded everything, every walk with Scout, every garden sunrise, every trembling morning when Jared thought he couldn't get out of bed. Jared thought Peter was making a documentary, but maybe it was something else. Peter passed on a Monday. Jared didn't sleep for 3 days. He fed Scout, watered the orchids Peter used to hum to, sat at the edge of their bed without speaking. And when the lawyer finally called about the will, Jared expected nothing. He would have been content with a keychain or a shirt still smelling like him. But then came the shock. Peter had left behind a trust fund worth $1 million, earmarked for animal welfare causes, channeled through a foundation in Scout's name. Jared had been listed as its permanent guardian. The fund would only remain valid if Scout continued to live under Jared's care, in their shared home. If Scout was removed, the fund dissolved entirely. Jared was stunned, moved, even. Until the doorbell rang 2 days later, and standing there were Peter's estranged siblings and his father. Dressed in black suits they hadn't worn for the funeral, they smiled like old friends, but their words cut like blades. "We've come to take the duh." Scout barked once, then went silent. They spoke of responsibility, of Jared's emotional instability, of how Peter would have wanted the family name to be involved in the legacy. They framed it as concern, but Jared knew better. He'd heard how they called Scout a mutt behind closed doors, how they called Jared a phase. They didn't want the dog, they wanted the money. And Jared, still grieving, still raw, stood there clutching Scout's leash like it was a lifeline. He didn't cry, he didn't yell. He simply said, "You didn't come to say goodbye to him. You don't get to take what he loved most." But they wouldn't stop there. They filed a legal claim the next morning, questioning the validity of the will, alleging emotional coercion, and seeking custody of Scout. What began as mourning had turned into a legal war. And somewhere in the silence of the house, Scout curled up beneath Peter's old desk. Jared looked at her, then at the empty chair, and he whispered, more to the air than to himself, "What did you do, Peter? What are you trying to protect me from?" That night, Jared couldn't sleep again. But Scout stood guard by the door, as if she knew something was coming, something big. If stories of love, loss, and quiet resilience move you, follow Heart Stories for more tales that speak to the soul. Jared sat across the long oak table. The air in the law office too still, too sterile. The scent of leather chairs and dry paper made him nauseous. Scout was lying by his feet, as silent as the sealed envelope in the lawyer's hand. It was the official reading of Peter's last will and testament. The family sat to his left, hands folded, faces tight with anticipation disguised as grief. They had shown up in black again. This time, not for mourning, but for positioning. Jared didn't speak to them. He didn't need to. Their eyes, scanning the room and the documents, spoke clearly enough. We're here for what's left, not for who's left behind. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. Peter had indeed designated a trust $1 million fund to be managed in Scout's name, designed specifically to support the rescue and care of abused animals. But the conditions were strict. Scout had to remain in Jared's care. If, for any reason, Scout was removed from his custody, the fund would be terminated and the money redirected to a backup clause full donation to a chain of shelters across the country. Not a cent to the family. Gasps were muffled. Chairs creaked. Jared didn't react. He already knew. But the room burned with disbelief. Peter's sister, Miranda, leaned forward, her voice thin with restrained fury. Are we supposed to accept that a dog is now more deserving of his legacy than his own blood? The lawyer raised his hand calmly. Mr. Shaw made his intentions very clear. He also provided recordings to support the will's legitimacy, should anyone contest. Miranda's father stood. We will be contesting. This is emotional manipulation. Peter was sick, vulnerable, and this, he gestured to Scout, this is not how families protect their own. Jared finally looked up. Protect, he said softly. You stopped calling him when he married me. You never visited when he got sick. You didn't send a single message when he was dying. And now you want to claim the one thing he loved most. The silence that followed was a silence filled with shame, if any remained. The lawyer proceeded to explain that the court would review any contestation, but until then, Scout remained with Jared, and the fund would remain untouched. That night, Jared fed Scout as usual. She ate slowly, her eyes never leaving his. He sat on the floor beside her, ran a hand down her back, and whispered, I think they're going to try harder. And they did. The legal battle escalated quickly. The family filed suit within days, painting Jared as emotionally unstable, accusing him of exploiting Peter's illness to gain financial control. Media caught on. Local outlets spun headlines that twisted the facts. Some people called him brave, others a manipulator. But Jared didn't care what strangers thought. He cared that Scout began flinching every time the doorbell rang. He cared that Peter's voice no longer echoed in their home. Only his absence. Then came the letter from the court. A custody hearing was scheduled. The family's request was formal transfer Scout to Peter's sister. Miranda, citing concerns for the animal's mental well-being and exposure to public chaos. The irony nearly made Jared laugh. They were going to try to take Scout. Not the money, not the house, but her. Jared sat in Peter's old studio, surrounded by boxes of tapes, unfinished scripts, framed photos of Peter in jungles, on mountains, in slums, anywhere he could tell a story. And it hit him. Peter was a planner, a recorder, a man of messages. He never left things unspoken. There had to be more, driven by something more powerful than fear. Jared began searching through drawers, shelves, hard drives. He stayed up until sunrise, scanning files, backing up corrupted footage. Scout curled beside him the whole time, as if waiting for something only she could smell. Then, buried deep in an unmarked box, inside a black case labeled Private for Jared, he found a small USB. He plugged it in with shaking hands, and everything changed. The USB was scratched, covered in dust, and wrapped in a faded piece of cloth that still smelled faintly like the cologne Peter used to wear. Jared hesitated before plugging it into the laptop. Scout stirred at his feet, ears perked. The house felt suddenly too quiet, as if holding its breath. Inside the drive were dozens of video files unnamed, undated. Jared clicked the first. The screen lit up with Peter's face, thinner than Jared remembered, but smiling. Hey, love, Peter's voice came through, soft and steady. If you're watching this, it means they've done what I feared. Jared froze. Peter sat in the same studio Jared was now sitting in. Behind him, Scout lay curled on a rug, just like she did tonight. I know what you're thinking, Peter continued, that I should have trusted the process, that you could have handled it, but I couldn't risk it, not after everything we fought through. Not after they tried to erase you from every part of my life. That's why I did it the way I did. He paused, breathing hard. Then he looked directly into the camera. Jared, I know. If I had left the money in your name, they would have gone after you with everything they had. And you're strong, but you shouldn't have to be strong alone. That's why I used Scout. I knew they wouldn't understand it. I knew it would confuse them. But I also knew they wouldn't be able to touch you if your name wasn't on the paper. Jared felt a lump in his throat. Then came the sentence that struck the deepest chord words Peter had once written in a note, but never said out loud. I knew if I left it all to you, they'd tear you apart. So I left it to Scout, to keep it safe for you, to guard the part of me that's still here in the places you're too tired or too hurt to step into. Jared covered his mouth, tears spilling without permission. Scout nudged closer, resting her chin on his knee. Peter continued, everything you need is with her. She's not just a duo. Jared, she's the part of our story that can't be rewritten by courts or headlines. Keep her close. Let them come. She'll guard what matters. Just like you guarded me. The screen faded to black. Jared sat in the dark for a long time. The sun was rising through the blinds, but he didn't move. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from a strange sense of relief. A message from beyond, a final plan, wrapped in love and fear and defiance. Later that morning, as he fed Scout, something clicked. He remembered the leather collar Peter had insisted on keeping when Scout fell ill 2 months before Peter's passing. Peter had stitched it back together himself, refusing to buy a new one. Sentimental value, he'd said. Jared unbuckled the collar gently. He ran his fingers along the inside. At first, nothing. But then his thumb hit a ridge, a small slit, hand-stitched. Inside, tucked carefully behind the inner lining, was a micro USB. Jared inserted it into the laptop with shaking hands. It contained one file, a single video, dated just days before Peter's final hospitalization. The image was blurry at first, but then it cleared. Peter sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket. Scout curled beside him. I hope this never has to be played, Peter whispered, his voice faint. But if they push you, if they drag you into court, into headlines, into dark places, I want this to be your light. He looked straight ahead. I know. If I left the money to you, they'd never stop. So I left it in the name of the only one they'd underestimate, Scout, because they never saw her as anything more than a mutt, just like they never saw you as family. But she is, and you are. And that's why she'll hold the key. For you, for us. He coughed, hard, then smiled. Let them come. You've already won. The video ended. Jared reached for Scout, pulled her close. She licked his face like she always did when he cried. And for the first time since the funeral, he whispered thank you. Not to Peter, not to the court, but to the who had been carrying the truth, quietly, loyally, beneath her collar. The war wasn't over. But now, Jared had something stronger than money, stronger than legal arguments. He had Peter's words, and they would echo in a courtroom that had never known this kind of love. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and cold dust. Jared sat quietly on the plaintiff's side, Scout curled by his feet, a calm presence amid the storm. Across from him sat Peter's father, two of his siblings, and their attorney Slick, poised and already smirking. To them, this was a technicality, a legal loophole to be exploited, a D, a will, a broken man. But to Jared, it was a line, and he would not cross it in silence. The judge entered, older, measured, and visibly unimpressed with the media attention the case had drawn. The room settled. Then began the arguments. The family's lawyer opened strong, claiming Jared had isolated Peter during his illness, influenced a dying man's decisions, and illegally orchestrated a trust to avoid family inheritance. They even presented fabricated letters suggesting Peter had once called Jared unstable. Jared didn't flinch. When it was his turn, his lawyer kept it simple. Your Honor, what Peter Shaw did was legal, what he did was deliberate, and what he did was documented. The judge raised an eyebrow. You have evidence to support his state of mind during the drafting of the trust. Jared nodded, and then the video played. The room dimmed as the projector lit up. On screen, Peter appeared on the back porch, blanket wrapped around his thin frame. Scout by his side, Peter's voice filled the courtroom. I know. If I left the money to Jared, they'd come for him. So I left it to Scout because they never saw her as family, just like they never saw him. There were no dramatic cuts, no music, just truth. I was of sound mind. I spoke to attorneys. I had full capacity, but I also had full clarity. And I knew one thing: Jared loved me when I had nothing, when my bones hurt, when I couldn't even stand, and my family didn't show up for any of it. He paused. Scout is the symbol, but the love that was always his. Gasps rippled through the room. Jared didn't look at the family. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. Peter leaned forward on the screen. I'm not asking the court to believe in sentiment. I'm asking it to honor a decision made without pressure, without fraud, and with purpose. This fund is not about a dog. It's about the one person who never walked away from me. The video ended. The room sat in stunned stillness. Even the bailiff seemed unable to move. Peter's father opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The judge cleared her throat. I've heard enough. Her ruling came minutes later. The will stood. The trust was valid. Custody of Scout remained with Jared Whitman. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. No appeal. As the gavel struck the bench, Jared didn't smile. He simply reached down and scratched behind Scout's ears. She leaned into him like she always did. The family left the courtroom in silence, their power stripped not by rage or revenge, but by a man who chose to speak even after death. Reporters flooded the hallway, but Jared didn't stop. He walked through the flashing lights, Scout beside him, head high, outside. The cold air hit his face. It was the first breath in weeks that didn't taste like grief. And still, Peter's voice echoed. This fund is not about a dog. It's about the one person who never walked away from me. Jared looked down at Scout. You did good, he whispered. You kept him safe. But what he didn't say, what he barely dared to admit, was this. She had kept him safe, too. The morning after the verdict, Jared walked through the house as if it belonged to someone else. The curtains still smelled like Peter's cologne bonus. The coffee mugs were still lined up in pairs. But something had shifted. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. Scout followed him from room to room, her tail wagging faintly with each step. She was older now, her muzzle silvering, her stride slower, but her loyalty never aged. Jared smiled at her, the same way Peter once had. They had made it through. Over the next few months, Jared worked quietly. He stayed away from cameras, declined interviews, and returned to the rescue shelter where he and Peter had first met Scout. The trust fund remained untouched, carefully invested into the shelter's expansion, with Jared overseeing every detail. He renamed the project the Shaw Scout Fund, not for legacy, but for love. Scout's health began to decline in winter. It happened slowly: missed meals, labored breathing, nights where she whimpered in her sleep. Jared didn't rush to any hospital. He simply laid beside her on the floor, wrapped in Peter's old sweater, whispering stories only the three of them remembered. She passed away on a Sunday morning, with her head resting on Jared's chest. There was no audience, no judge, just the wind and the quiet sound of goodbye. Jared buried her beneath the old oak tree in the backyard, in the same spot where Peter had proposed, and where Scout used to bury her toys. He placed a single stone above the soil, carved with 3 words, still watching over. For weeks, the house felt different. Not empty, just waiting. Then one afternoon, during a visit to the shelter for a routine check-in, Jared heard a commotion near the intake area. A new arrival, skittish, underfed, eyes full of something he couldn't name. He turned the corner and stopped. It was him, the dog, a brindle mutt with mismatched eyes, one brown, one ice blue. Years ago, Jared had tried to adopt him, but Peter had gently refused. We already have Scout, he'd said with a laugh. There's only room for one drama queen in this house. But the dog hadn't forgotten. As soon as he saw Jared, he froze. Then, slowly, he wagged his tail once. Jared knelt down. You waited, didn't you? The dog stepped in Mawarnipburn. No leash, no command, just trust. Jared reached it into his coat pocket and pulled out Scout's old collar. He'd brought it with him that day, without knowing why. The leather was worn, but the stitching Peter had sewn was still intact. He slipped it gently around the dog's neck. "Let's start again." They walked out together, side by side, down the gravel path and into the quiet of the evening. No cameras, no courtrooms, just footsteps. One man, one dog. And three hearts that somehow still beat in rhythm. One remembered, one lost, and one found. Have you ever lost something, only to find a part of it again in a completely unexpected way? If this story touched something in you, follow Heart Stories for more tales of quiet love, second chances, and the bonds that never really leave us.